India is an incredible place for anyone who wants to start a business, whether you're Indian or whether you're a foreigner like me.
Well, that's not the case for everyone. Let's take a look at this guy on Twitter. He wants to move his operations from India to the US.
Okay, but what about this guy? He left his career and the life that he had built for himself in the United States for 15 years to join India's startup ecosystem. I think we're just cherry picking examples here. These are just isolated incidents that we're finding on Twitter, and they don't really paint a full picture.
Well, not really. Data actually proves what I just said. In last 7 years, more than 30,000 HNIs, which are basically high net worth individuals, these rich people, they've left India to just go to some other country. And I'm sure a lot of these people are entrepreneurs.
I mean, I think some of them are probably entrepreneurs, but I wouldn't say a lot of them. It's probably a small minority, and people leave their home country for n number of reasons, right? People emigrate. I personally left Canada, my country of origin, and I had no plans of becoming an entrepreneur in making that decision.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Not a lot of people leave to just start up in some other country. But I think there are a lot of fundamental issues in India's startup ecosystem, which even after so many years of changes, so many years of improvement, people are still facing. For example, that tweet that I mentioned earlier, this guy has tried for 2 months to start up a company in India and it still wasn't done, right? And it's not just him. We even at Backstage with Millionaire, we spent 1 year to register you as a director.
Well, it was like 9 months, and the director part was quick, but yeah, there were a lot of other FDI related issues that took 9 months in total.
Yeah,
right.
And recently it took us like 6 months to get a GST number. And things like these, people think about it when they take that big decision, whether they want to start up in India or should they just move out. So I think these issues, somewhere they're still lingering around and we have to address them.
Fair enough. You're talking about Brij Singh though. So things were resolved, although yes, he did have to take to Twitter and go viral basically for things to be sped up, which is unfortunate. But I think we shouldn't take things out of proportion here. The number of startups that are being created in India by Indians and also some foreigners too, we've been covering a lot of those on the podcast, versus the number of startups that are being created by Indians outside of India. I mean, the difference is night and day. It's a tiny minuscule minority of companies that are being created by Indians outside versus inside. Since 2016, there's been this huge acceleration. The number of startups in India since 2016 has grown by 20x, taking the number from just 4,750 to more than 1 lakh. This is incredible. So, as you've probably guessed by now, the topic of today's video is India a good place to start up in 2023 versus, for example, starting up in another country instead? And the opinions that we're going to be arguing in today's debate aren't necessarily opinions that we personally believe, especially Pankaj is going to be sort of the devil's advocate in this conversation. So keep that in mind. Don't get angry at us in the comments section for having these opinions, because we're just trying to educate and entertain you guys with this debate.
Okay, with that out of the way, let's start by talking about something that's very recent, the entire 28% GST on real money gaming startups.
What does that have to do with people starting up in India versus outside?
Well, it created so much panic, so much uncertainty for founders and investors. And for example, HNIs said in his many tweets, that investors are not gonna invest in India now, because government creates so much uncertainty for them. Everyone is looking at India as the next big thing. But if we keep on doing things like that, if we keep on bringing regulations like these people won't have the trust, right? Because once an investor comes, he thinks for 10-year period, right? So the entire, for example, VC cycle in a company is 10-year time. So if you invest in a startup, it goes public and then you make money in 10 years time. But if things like these coming up, I don't think that's a good sign for Indian startups.
Yeah, it's true. Investors had poured probably north of $1 billion, possibly multiple billions of dollars into these real money sort of gambling. I know people get a little sensitive about the gaming word, but they're games that involve gambling, right? But I think the thing that you and people like Ushnir and other people who are talking about this in the larger conversation around gambling and real money games is that this is actually just a part of the industry. Gaming as a whole is actually much larger in India and also internationally. And so I think, yes, some investors are going to be burned by this 28% GST decision, but the GST is only being applied to the gambling side of the industry, not the rest of the industry.
Well, you're right about that how this entire 28% GST thing is just on the real money gaming startups. But I think you and people like you are not paying attention to is the majority of revenue in Indian gaming sector, it comes from these real money gaming startups. For example, in FY22, India's gaming industry was worth $2.6 billion and 57% of their revenue came from these real money or gambling startups like Dream11, Gamecraft, and MPL. And because of this tax, well, it's not just a tax, it's a death sentence for these startups. Because since that announcement, at least 4 startups have either shut down completely or they've shut down their real money gaming operations. And most bigger players, they have laid off hundreds of people.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. I understand that investors get a little bit nervous when they lose like billions of dollars of investments because of government of India's regulations and restrictions. Founders also get really nervous, like, should I start my company in India or should I go and build this real money gaming company in another country where the regulations are less strict and then I can just make my app available in the Indian Play Store from abroad, right? And then I'm not going to deal with any of these taxation issues. I totally understand that. I think my counter argument to that, though, would be that this is a problem in every country. Every country has changing regulations. The landscape is never fixed. There's new laws that come into place as new industries are created. This is just a normal thing. This is part of business. And investors also know that. And any investor who's invested in India thinking that, oh, India's never going to create any new laws which might affect my investment, probably they're not the smartest investor, right? India does have a track record of doing these kinds of things in the past. Crypto was another industry that was affected, Web3. This happens. And I think most investors know that. And it's a part of their calculation, right? 9 out of 10 startups fail. And one of those 9 is going to be the real money gambling or the crypto company that you invested in. And it's a tiny part of your portfolio, but you made that investment because you thought maybe, hopefully, that industry would grow. And then if it doesn't, oh, well, you have a diversified portfolio, so it's not a big deal.
Well, I think you're focusing a lot on investor part and not focusing on the founder's part, which is the core of this debate. Because I think founder is the bigger piece in this entire startup ecosystem because he first has to have the confidence in a country where he's starting up, right? So I want to explain the various difficulties people faced from crypto example that you just, started talking about. So Indian founders were building crypto products since 2017, 2018, right? And pandemic was sort of the high part of that. India was the biggest country in terms of crypto transaction. And
is it?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Well, surprisingly, that was true. India was sort of a hotbed for these crypto founders. People from many countries were coming and building in, India, especially in Bangalore. I met these small teams, people from Estonia, people from Dubai, they were building in India around 2018, 2019.
Hacker houses.
Yeah. And at the same time, what was happening was RBI with Indian government, they were sort of planning to kill this entire industry. So in 2018, they announced that banks won't be dealing, like major banks won't be dealing with crypto transactions, right? So then these people go to court and court sort of quashes the RBI's decision. But then in 2021, when Indian crypto scene was at its peak, they come up with this 30% tax on profits, right? And then 1% TDS on every transaction. And I think that was the sort of, nail in the coffin for crypto founders. And a lot of them moved to Dubai. At least a dozen startups in just first few months, they had moved to Dubai. And I'm sure these people would have raised like hundreds of millions of dollars in India. And they've taken all that money, all that talent to Dubai now.
Okay, well, like we said at the beginning of this video, we're not necessarily representing our opinions here. I'm very much like free market capitalism. So when governments come in and try to make restrictions, it's frustrating to me. But looking at this from the government of India's perspective, looking at this from the RBI's perspective, can't you understand why they would take these kinds of measures? Right? Look at the Indian population, right? This is a totally new space for people. As you said, it was the largest adoption of cryptocurrency in the world. And I would say 99% of the people who are getting into this industry had no idea what they were doing. It was just their uncles, their aunties, their cousins. And, people were just telling them, hey, you need to invest in this, you need to invest in that. And they're just throwing money at stuff and they have no idea what they're doing. Obviously, you need to regulate that kind of Wild West situation, right? If look at the US, look at the number of scams, Celsius, FTX, people lost billions of dollars in they were essentially scams, right? Because they were unregulated. The SEC did a terrible job regulating this industry, whereas the RBI and the government of India actually protected its citizens. So in a way, I think the government of India was in the right here. I think they took measures to protect the population of this country in a way that the United States and probably Dubai as well and a lot of other countries did not, to their detriment.
See, I'm all up for regulations. I know it's government's job to safeguard its people, but at what cost, right? You mentioned that RBI did a very good job in India, but all they had to do was to protect this industry at the same time they protected people, was to take these people in confidence. All they had to do was like have one meeting with the founders, just the top founders and all the investors, and then just tell them that this is what we are thinking. We give you 6 months, 1 year time to sort of adjust or, agree to our whatever we are thinking.
Or maybe come up with a policy that like a recommendation for a policy that we can potentially implement or tweak.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So instead of treating these people like criminals or, unwanted people, all they had to do was take them into confidence and just create this ecosystem for businesses to flourish, right? And I think that's what they didn't do. They totally failed in that. And I think that's one of the reasons why India does so poorly in terms of ease of doing business rankings.
I think I know where you're going with this, but I just want to give a little bit of context here regarding ease of doing business. So India has come a long way. In 2016, India was ranked at 130, and it's gone now to 63. So the ease of doing business in this country has really improved. And I think people who were thinking of starting up in India back in 2016, maybe it wouldn't have been a good decision back then, but now it's actually much, much better. And it's getting better every single year.
Well, I as a founder won't really care about those rankings that where India stands on ease of doing business. If I'm starting up today, I'll take a look at the best country in the world, and India stands nowhere, compared to Singapore, Dubai, or US, right? So in terms of starting a business, it's still very challenging in India. So India stands 136 out of 190 countries in terms of which country is best to start up, right? And there are clear reasons for that, right? I want to give you an example. So if you want to start up a restaurant in Delhi, you need 26 licenses. And out of those licenses, there's one license called Police Eating House License. And for that, you need 45 documents to get that, right? And if you compare that to getting a gun license in India, all you need is 19 documents. So that tells you the entire how easy it is to start a business.
So these are all valid points, and you're right. There are many countries around the world that are easier to start a business in than India. Like you said, 136 out of 190. It's faster in the UAE, Singapore, US, a number of other countries, a lot of Western countries. It's just faster. And over here too, you have to get a CA typically just to navigate all the paperwork. This is right. This is true. But I think things are only getting better because people come over here and they start businesses and they raise complaints. They tell the government that, hey, this is not working for me and it's frustrating and it's slow, and look at this other country and I'm thinking of starting up there instead. Can you please? People like Bridge Singh, right? Who he went public, he talked about this thing on Twitter, and then literally the MCA, someone at the MCA reached out to him and helped him and walked him through the process and explained why things were going more slowly. So this happens, right? I think it doesn't really prove my point or make my argument any stronger, but I think if people are thinking, hey, where should I start up? I'm Indian. Should I start up in the US or should I start up in India? If you come to India and you start your business here and you're vocal about the problems that you're facing, that's the only way things are going to get better. And I know that's very altruistic, and a lot of people are going to say, well, I'd rather be selfish and I'm just thinking about myself here. I don't care about the country and its improvement. I just want my business to do well. I get that. But I do think, again, coming back to that point, things are getting better over time, and significantly better over time. So back in 2004, it took 127 days on average to start a business in India, whereas now it takes 18 days on average to start a business. 18 days, still a long time. It's more than 2 weeks, and a lot can happen in 2 weeks, right? But it's so much better than it used to be. And I think the reason why it's so much better than it used to be is because of all the people who have come back, started businesses here, or the people who have just started here in the first place and told the government that, this is not working, that's not working. And so the government goes and fixes it. I know it's easy to be pessimistic and say, oh, the government doesn't care. The government just wants, control and money or whatever. But the statistics, the facts over time tell a different story.
Well, I wish more people thought like you, that how you should just take a leap of faith. And if you're outside, come to India, start a business here. If you're here, just, start your business. And just by being vocal, things will get better. But I think entrepreneurs, they're not looking for that. They just want to build successful businesses, right? And the data point that you mentioned, that from, 100 days, it takes 18 days now to start in India. Well, in countries like US, Singapore, it takes less than a week, right? And if you want to start up in Singapore, you never have to set a foot there. Everything can just happen online. So that's what we're talking about here.
I think India is moving in that direction. I wouldn't be surprised if within the next couple of years, maybe the next decade at a maximum, it will be possible to start a business in India from outside of India. You can do it remotely over the internet, but you're right. We're not quite there yet. And it's going to take time. It's going to take people telling the government that that's what they want. So your point is certainly valid.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a very tragic story that I read somewhere on Reddit or Twitter. And that sort of illustrates my point that how it's very painful even today to start a business in India, especially manufacturing business. So there's this guy who came back to India. He wanted to start a metalworks factory. So he was working as an engineer, but he wanted to do something in India, right? Especially in the manufacturing sector. But when he came back, he realized that you need so many licenses. You need to go to so many departments, and all they do is just send you to next department. No one is, doing their job there. All what's happening is you wasting your time. And every department this guy was going to, they were asking him for a lot of money. And the thing that troubled him a lot was he had all the documents for the land. He was still asked to get a no objection certificate from a nearby temple. And the thing is, the temple was 800 meters away from the land. And still they had to get that no objection certificate. And that sort of tells you the issues, the unwanted things that you have to get done to start something in India. And so they got the NOC from the temple saying that, temple doesn't have any rights on the land. And when they approached the officials, they said they had to get another letter from a revenue department. And then revenue department people, they took 3 months and asked for 1 crore rupees bribe. And I think by this time, this person had already given up. He had so many dreams of starting up in India, but I think things like these sort of broke his courage or whatever, it takes to start up a business in India. So then this guy tries to get a letter from the temple priest saying that they don't have any authority over the land. But even after that, he had to get one other letter from endowments department. And when he goes there, they ask for another 20 lakh bribe. And all these people were saying, you're starting a factory. Aren't you that rich? Can't you just pay us this money as a bribe? And I think by this time, the guy had already given up. He just considered that land as an investment for future. And now he has moved to Vietnam to start the factory that he was supposed to start in India. And that's how we lost an entrepreneur and a manufacturing opportunity. And that's just one story. I'm sure every day or every month, hundreds of these stories are happening in different parts of India.
I mean, I can't really argue with that. It is a post on Reddit, so we can't really verify if this even actually happened, but it does certainly sound like something that is plausible. I can totally picture this happening. And you're right, there are huge challenges. There's on the ground reality right now in India is still rough, and you still do often need to pay some money to accelerate things or make sure that people give you the approvals that they're supposed to give you. Bribery essentially, and there's corruption, and this is an issue, and yeah, the temples and all. I think we don't need to differentiate, right? It could be a temple, church, a masjid, right? Like it's just frustrating that's, it's clearly not their land, but they still need to get a letter. I get that. I think that would be very frustrating if it was me trying to set up that manufacturing facility as well. But again, I want to look at timelines here, progress over time. So 30 years back, it's just been 30 years since India's economy was liberalized, right? And so the amount of progress, I mean, think about how difficult would it have been for someone coming back into the country to set up this kind of metalworking plant 30 years ago. Like you wouldn't have even thought that it was possible. You wouldn't have even tried because it literally would have been impossible, right? Whereas now he tried, he got pretty far, and eventually, yes, this individual did give up. But I think the amount of progress that he was able to make wouldn't have been possible like a couple decades back. In fact, if we just look at construction permits, which is something that he would have had to obtain, India actually ranks 27 globally in the category of dealing with construction permits. And on average, it takes about 106 days to get all of the permits required to build something. And the other thing too is that we can go back and forth, tit for tat. You can give an example of someone who gave up, who struggled, who wasn't able to do it, right? They came back to India and they were disappointed. I can give you an example of someone who the opposite happened. They came from outside. They were maybe in the United States, for example, came back to India, started something. It was hugely successful, and they actually made more money in India than they could have outside of the country. So a good example of this is Hemant Mohapatra. He left the job and the life that he'd built in the United States for 15 years, and now he's successfully running a venture fund, Lightspeed India. And the thing is that was 5 years ago, 2018, and I officially permanently shifted to India back in 2017. So I've had the privilege of seeing what's happened in India over those 5 years, actually 6 years. And the two countries, India of 2018 and India of 2023, I mean, they're completely different, especially when it comes to startups and tech. So much progress has happened. And I think in the next 5 years, it's going to be night and day as well. We're going to look back on 2023 and think like, wow, that was like the medieval, like the Stone Age, right? Compared to the future that we're going to have 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, progress is happening. And so Hemant building his company, coming to India in 2018, and the amount of progress that he's seen in 5 years. I think if people come to India now, whether they're Indian, whether they're foreigners, they won't be sorry, right? You start up in India in 2023, and in 5 years, you're gonna see positive results. 10 years, you might be a multimillionaire. And so the thing is, yes, today it is difficult to start a business in India. Yes, in 2018, it was even more difficult to start a business in India. Yes, all the way back in 2015, 2012, like you can go as far back as you want. It gets worse and worse, right? And moving forward into the future, it gets better and better. And so I think one of the reasons why India is a great place to start up in 2023 is because it's difficult. And so there aren't that many people, right? It still seems like a challenge. It still seems like a developing country. People say third world country. I don't think India really qualifies as third world anymore, but it's still difficult enough that it's kind of a diamond in the rough, right? It's not an obvious choice. And because of that, there's less competition. Once India becomes like Singapore, like the United States, like Dubai, UAE, then everyone's going to want to come here. And then you're going to have to compete with all of those people. Whereas now, if you come here now, you get the early mover advantage, right? The early bird gets the worm. And I think that's definitely true. Even now in 2023, after all the progress we've seen, it's still early days for India. And all of the development and progress and innovation is yet to come. And that's really exciting to me. This is still the first inning.
Well, things are definitely moving ahead in India, right? And you mentioned about early mover advantage. But I'm just wondering if that early mover advantage in India, is that more important than, just having an advantage of building an ecosystem like Singapore or US, right? Because there's a more certainty that your business is going to reach somewhere. But in India, either you can sort of, just taking advantage of that, either you can become a unicorn or you can die, right? In next 2 to 3 years, or you're going to give up because of all the frustrations that we spoke about the person recently. And you mentioned about timeline of last 10 years and how things have improved. But all I can think of these three instances, right? First is crypto, entire crackdown on crypto startups. Second is this 28% GST that we talked about. And I think third is the entire crackdown on financial fintech startups back in 2017-18. That sort of killed startups like Slice and FamPay and stuff like that. So what I'm seeing here is, instead of startups coming in India, people who have built successful businesses, they are leaving India. So in just last 7 years, from 2014 to 2021, more than 2,700 foreign companies have left India. And this includes the likes of Karen Energy, Carrefour, Heineken, and Ford.
Just to counter your point on this, I think, I'm not sure about all of these instances, but definitely in the case of Ford and a lot of companies, foreign companies that tried to enter the Indian market, it's not an easy market to crack. Indian consumers are very different from consumers in other parts of the world, and vice versa, right? Every country is different, but I think especially in India, companies come in with this confidence that we can just take this country on and we can win in this market. We can dominate the way that we have in other countries, around the world. And then they find out that, oh, this is actually not as easy as we expected. Maybe we should have done a joint venture. Maybe we should have taken a different approach. Maybe we should have done more market research to actually understand how Indian consumers think and how they buy, right? How they consume. And so in the case of Ford, I think that's actually what happened. They kind of messed up, right? And a lot of companies have made that mistake in the past. Another good example is Harley Davidson. They ended up having to do a partnership with Hero. And then also I think Dunkin' Donuts was another company that tried to enter the Indian market and then really struggled. Starbucks at one point had tried to enter and then they had to exit the market and come back with a partnership with Tata. So it happens frequently. And I don't think it's necessarily that India is not a good market. It's just a different market. It's a more challenging market.
Well, in the case of Ford, you're right. They left India because of their own wrongdoings. They couldn't understand Indian customer. But if you take the example of Karen Energy, it clearly looks like Indian government sort of went after them. So in 2015, Indian government imposed a tax liability of worth 20,000 crore rupees. And that was after Indian government had already changed tax laws in 2012. So 3 years after that. So what happened here is sort of something called retroactive tax. So you change your tax laws now, but you tell the companies that you're liable to pay tax ever since you started operations. So similar thing happened to that 28% GST thing. So I don't know if you're aware that recently Indian government sent a tax notice of 40,000 crore rupees to Dream 11.
Yeah.
Because of all the operations they have done in last 15 years. So what I'm saying here is...
Wait, 40,000 crore rupees, they're applying retroactively based on the current 28% GST?
Exactly.
That is... Okay, sorry, I'm going like off script here, but that's really wild. Continue.
And it just didn't happen with the Karen Energy. It also happened with Vodafone like 10 years back or something. They also received this big tax liability which happened because of retroactive tax.
Which department is doing this, by the way? Is this income tax department?
So right now it's GST department. I don't know if in the case of Vodafone because it came after GST were sort of happened in 2015-16.
Okay.
But what I'm saying ultimately is it gave a bad signal to other companies around the world that in India, your interests are not safe.
India is not open for business.
Exactly. And in both these cases, these companies, they ended up winning the case against Indian government in the court of law. So what I'm saying is these things don't go well with, other governments and other big businesses.
The thing is, and I don't know if you realized this while you were sharing that story of Karen Energy and also Vodafone, they won, right? Think about that. They won. They actually got money from the government of India that the government of India had to pay them for the action that they had taken, right? It was wrong. It was decided in the court of law, as you said, that this was not the right move and that the government of India was liable to pay them for this decision. So in a way, right, even though, yes, it was difficult for them and they did face this situation, it was unfortunate that happened, a precedent was set that no, this behavior is not okay. And yeah, sometimes there's bad actors. Someone, in the government comes up with this plan and they execute it and everyone around them says, yeah, let's do it. Let's take money from this company. And then later on they find out, oh, actually we were in the wrong. We shouldn't have done that, right? I mean, governments are just groups of people at the end of the day, right? They're not, it's nothing more than that, right? And people make mistakes. People do the wrong thing. But over time, precedents get set. Culture emerges, right, as these decisions are taken. And so I think in this particular case, it was actually a move in a positive direction. I keep coming back to that, right? Things keep getting better. India's not getting worse. India's getting better. Therefore, now is a great time to start up in India because it's only going to get better going forward.
Well, you're right. These companies did get their investment back after going to the court. But the thing to understand here is money is not the only thing, right? Companies want this assurance that they can start up in India. And these companies have, they're multi-billion dollar companies, right? If let's imagine a startup with five team members, they can't afford to have lawyers, right? So how much time will they take to get a resolution in the court of law? And if you take India's case, India's position is 163 in terms of enforcing contracts. And if you take a look at how much time it takes to enforce that contract, it takes more than 1,400 days. That's 4 years. I mean, who has that much time to sort of go after a case and, have a resolution?
Okay, so we've gone back and forth. We've had this debate. We've shared our points, different stories. And I think people will take away whatever opinion they want. Some people might agree with you. Some people might agree with me. But let's just wrap this up with some final thoughts, some sort of macro thoughts on whether India is a good place to start up in 2023, or whether if you're thinking about starting up, should you go to another country? And I know we've used UAE, Singapore, and United States exclusively during this conversation, but this can apply to anywhere, right? Anywhere in Europe, North America, Latin America, like China, like anywhere in the world, you can basically start a company. Is it better to do your startup there, or is it better to do it in India? I still think that it's better to do it in India, again, because of the future potential. Talk to any entrepreneur in India right now, and everyone will agree that there still needs to be a lot of progress, right? India is not quite where we want it to be just yet. And that's true. I mean, I'm not going to deny that, right? As many arguments as I can share contradicting that argument, the truth is that the ground reality, when I walk outside of this office and I go back to my house, India is a challenging place to live in. It's a challenging place to do business in, but things are changing. They're changing quickly, and they're going to change even more quickly in the future. And not just in India, but in other countries that are considered global startup capitals, right? If you look at the United States right now, look at San Francisco. San Francisco is a mess, right? It is the hotspot for startups in the United States. It is like terrifying to walk around San Francisco. You don't want to walk around. You don't even want to, you want to get in your cab and just get to where you're going, because the ground reality when you're walking on the footpath in that city is like, it's a third world country, right? Crime, drug addiction, and not just San Francisco, go to New York, go to any city. I don't want to paint a terrible picture here. Like, United States also has a lot of great infrastructure, and in a lot of ways there are safety nets for people. So, but I feel like the United States is going down. But I feel like this is India's time, where India is going to rise up and become number 2 or even number 1 in terms of being a startup ecosystem that the rest of the world looks up to and is inspired by. It might take some time, 10, 20 years. Indian government will have to play its cards right as well. But I think if people come over here, and again, if they're vocal and they try to shape policy and shape the direction that this country moves in, rather than just being sort of apathetic, hands off, okay, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm just going to build my business and I'm going to do it in some other country because India is a hard place to build in, then that progress won't happen. Or it might happen in spite of those people, actually. In fact, that's the direction that things are moving in. But I mean, the bigger point that I guess I'm trying to make here is that if you're thinking of starting up in India, if you're an Indian living in another country and you're looking at India and you're thinking like, you know, is this a good place to start up in? I think the biggest reason, if I'm sort of trying to encourage you to come over here, the biggest reason why you should is that it is difficult right now. And I already made this argument earlier, but it's difficult now, but the people who come in now get that early bird special, right? And so that's just my opinion. Also, if you're a foreigner thinking of starting up in India, now is a great time. It's getting easier to live here. I've seen progress since 2017. This country is getting better, easier to live in, easier to start a business in. And those are my final thoughts. What about you?
Yeah, I can't deny all the progress that you mentioned. You're right, things are getting better. Every decade, India is touching new heights. But especially in this debate, I'm taking a look at the ground reality. And the reality is people still want to leave India, right? I want to take my example. The high school that I went to, I had like 5-6 friends in my circle. And I think leaving one of them, 4 or 5 of them are in the US, right? And these are the people who study from India. They spend their early years in India. But when it comes to selecting a career or choosing higher studies, they go and do it in US. And then they start their business there, because after doing your masters, you just get a funding very easily, or there are ecosystems there. And it's because of this, if you even look at Fortune 500 companies, out of 500 companies, 60 of them have their founders from Indian origin, right? And it's not just Fortune 500 companies.
But are they located in India, or you're saying they're international companies, non-Indian companies with Indian founders?
US Fortune 500 companies, and their founders are of Indian origin. Okay. People like Twitter, Google, and things like that. And if you take a look at startup unicorns in US, there are around 319 unicorns in US right now. And out of those, 67 founders are of Indian origin. So these people, they did their schooling in India, but when it came to, actually choosing a career or starting up or actually seeing which is better option out of US and India, they clearly chose US, right? So what I'm saying here is, yeah, things are getting better, but if we don't take, clear steps, if we don't wake up right now, India is going to miss this train. I don't want that to happen, obviously. No, none of us want that to happen. So I think closing thoughts will be like, yeah, things are getting better, but we have to see what are clear runs on the board, right? And just see how easy it's to start up in India, how easy to list a company in India, how easy it is to resolve a conflict in India. Because all of these things, they, like investors or founders, they sort of like take that into account while starting a business.
So really just to summarize, I think what you're saying is that you're not necessarily in favor of people starting up in other countries. It's just that you're saying we need to identify what the problem is first and not try to pretend like it doesn't exist, so that we can take steps to fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. And I think that's an optimistic note to end things on, that people should come over here, and also that we shouldn't just pretend like there are no problems, the way that I've kind of been doing in this debate. But, we had to choose sides. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed the conversation. I hope it generates conversation in the comments as well. I think there will be a lot of opinions here, but I hope that we've provided a level-headed response, arguing both sides, and maybe let us know who you think won the debate. If you had to choose, if you're starting up tomorrow, for example, where are you going to start up? Are you going to start up in India, or are you going to start up outside of India?
Okay, that's all we have, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right. Thanks so much.